It must have been very hard.
Oh, did it do that? I just clicked it and I didn't even know it was going to happen that quickly. Anyways,
We're being recorded.
it's scary to me, and I don't know I don't know. I don't know what to do about that anxiety. But what's you were talking about your renovations, which is how many renovations did you end up doing? Was it
Well, we've been married for 35 years, and we renovated from 1986, no, 1988
okay?
until 1999, no, 2013.
Okay,
I'm serious.
yeah,
I'm serious.
that's a lot of homes to go through because I
Well,
asked,
we only did 3 houses,
okay, yeah,
but it took us like 5 years, 3 years. And then this house was kind of an ongoing, like when we bought this place, it was just a shambles. We had to renovate it just kind of to get it livable.
yeah,
And then we lived in it for, I don't know, till 2010, 11, something like that. And then we decided to just do a big redo, and we put an addition on it. And yeah.
wow, wow. And your husband has done all that work himself.
Well, we had a contractor actually for the addition,
Okay,
and because it was a big job. Like
yeah.
they literally took the front of the house right off
Oh,
and
wow.
then added to it, right? So, and but they just did it to lock up stage. So they did all the framing,
Yeah,
and then they put the windows and doors in, and then
yeah,
he finished it, you know.
yeah.
So.
That's fascinating. So this house that we're currently living in, it was completely abandoned uh, when for maybe like 3 years before we purchased it. And I work in, well, I've been working in trade work since, well, halfway through my college career. I've started working for a builder and just knew that what I was studying at the time was going to be so silly when I went to go look for a job because I was studying poetry.
Oh, wow.
And so it was that, and I loved it. I loved my coursework and I loved my professors, and all that was just hunky dory. But I knew that there was no practicality to really what I was doing in that regard when it came to like securing my finances.
Yeah.
And and so that's when I started building. And then that turned into just a variety of different things in regards to like actual trade work. They were the kind of builders that would build like 3 houses a year, but they would, or even 2 houses a year. Now, builders nowadays will pump out, they'll have these huge corporations and they'll pump out 15 to 40 houses in a year or something like that.
Subdivisions. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, full on subdivisions, which, yeah. Um, but these guys were very slow, besides the, you know, pouring of the, footings and concrete and the, mechanical work. They did everything by
Yeah.
themselves. So I was able to learn a ton under
Trust.
those guys. But then like work dried up and then I painted for a long time. And then I started working for a restoration company, which was like all insurance claim works and other restoration projects. And so anyways, when my wife and I um we finally settled down to actually purchase our home after we got married, uh we purchased this home, which is the same thing. I mean, we are living in the house that we're remodeling.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
It's
that's
actually, I've said to people, it's actually if you can handle the stress, like
yeah,
if you're both chill about it,
sure.
right? Then it's the best way to go about it, because you're constantly going, when you're living in something, suddenly a need develops and you're like, oh, I need a closet right there, you know, or a window,
Yeah.
or whatever, and when you do a renovation and the builders are there and they're like, okay, where do you want this door frame and where do you want that window? And you're like, oh,
Mhm.
and then later they're done, it's done. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I put those
Now
windows.
now I moved in and now I know what I want,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love my house. It's, we're not going anywhere. Like, this is it for us. We're done. And but yeah, there is an advantage to going just nice and slow. And, I mean, we had in Switzerland, I had 2 children
Okay.
while we renovated that house,
Wow. Yeah, that's wild because we thought we would be here for 2 years. Now we're going on our 4th year, and
Mhm.
we didn't think we would have children here. We have our first son, and now we're talking about like, how we can make it work because there's no prospects looking at our current market.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out how we'll move the basement now to the garage, and just like figure out how to make this space work because it's a little 2-bedroom house, but we have a double lot. And to tell you what I've been doing the last like 2 years of my life, and probably what has taken away largely from participating online or with bridges of meaning and stuff, even though I'm in comment sections and stuff like that, but like the backyard has turned into like a full-on urban garden. Like,
Oh, beautiful.
I don't even know how to. So I mean, I've gardened for probably since I was a little child. My parents always kept a garden, but then, man, how do we even begin to approach this topic? Because the garden has been just like the most fundamental thing in my life. But
Yeah.
um uh this space in particular, when we purchased it, we had intentions of maybe doing something with the actual property. And I don't mean, yeah, we were going to renovate the house, but we had no intentions of doing anything like outreaching to the community or,
Right. Right.
spending time here and making this our place,
Yeah.
a place of permanence, or at least semi-permanence, because at
Yeah.
some point we will certainly outgrow this space if we have Lord willing, what we hope to have in regards to the number of children that we want.
Right. Right.
But
Bunk beds. They're really
yeah,
good.
yeah, bunk bed. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of when um we had gardened a little bit before the pandemic hit, but then when the pandemic came through and I had 8 weeks off of work, I remember uh, I thought maybe I could play GameCube for the first week, which was, like a little Nintendo game. And I thought I'd get lost in the imaginary world of Zelda for a while. But I realized after I got like a couple levels in, I was like, this is so dumb. What
Yeah.
am I doing? I'm wasting my time. And I went straight to the backyard and I started digging this massive hole, built like this foundation, built a greenhouse, and like just put like 6 beds back there, more beds up front, and just like the whole yard is now this massive garden.
Transformed.
Yeah, it's completely transformed into this like, I don't know, like this little magical spot. And now it's hard to even, there's so much sentimental value in even that personally, but now it's beyond just my own personal endeavors. Now it's like neighbors and this and that and the other thing, and,
That's
and
awesome.
it's
So it's
not.
community. So you must really be enjoying that, a lot of the conversation with Michael Martin then, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which is just crazy because I've been consuming a ton of Rudolf Steiner's works, like
Oh,
through audio, but like
yeah, the audiobooks. Yeah.
he's tripping me out, especially these last like couple weeks. I almost feel like I have to put him down for a certain amount of time just to digest what I'm consuming, because
Yeah.
yeah, he's more out there than I can even begin to comprehend,
Right.
Um,
Right. But it's interesting because I do the same thing. I'll just get on this Rudolf Steiner kick, and it'd be like three videos, three audio, whatever's in a row. And then after them, I'm just like,
yeah.
okay, wait, we got to get back down to the ground.
Yeah.
Put our feet on the ground. But and I don't always understand everything he's talking about. And he talks about it so matter-of-factly, right?
Oh.
But then it comes back to me.
Yeah.
Like it'll float back, right?
Yeah.
And I'll be doing something, and all of a sudden this thing will float back, and I'll be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it is with Rudolf Steiner,
Yeah. And my wife is super interested now that we have a young child. Like, man, I could talk about him for a long time. We're interested in the I don't even know how to say it. Waldorf school. So like, there's Montessori teaching, but then there's the Waldorf. Yeah, that's how you say it. Waldorf school. So, there's an interest there. And me, I'm like, okay, well, she's diving in on the educational front, but I'm diving in on this like whole other level.
Yeah, but that's going to be like the major component to his whole life is your garden.
Yeah.
He's going to be in there just soaking it up.
Yeah.
We had a really big garden in Telegraph Creek because we sustained completely from our own, like all our own food, right? Because we were 700 kilometers from the nearest city, right?
Yeah.
So, there was a little gas station convenience store run by the First Nations Indian band there.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But most of the, by the time the food got there, it was either, moldy or going bad, one or the other. And it was really expensive. So we just didn't buy food. We just ate what we grew and what we raised. And well, I shouldn't say we didn't buy food. We would buy staples every 6 months. We'd go to the city and do a big shop and bring home, the staples, right? Flour and salt and sugar and stuff like that. What was I going to say now? Oh yeah, my kids. So the people who we bought the place from, they tried to market garden because they saw a niche because nobody had fresh vegetables, right? And none of the people on reserve grew gardens. They just didn't. And so they had built 3 greenhouses, and then they had this massive raspberry plot, with raspberry bushes. And so when the raspberries started, it was just like we were out there like picking raspberries. It was ridiculous. We like up to here in raspberries. And I used to send the kids right after homeschooling. I'd be like, okay, go get some more raspberries. And they made there's a song. I don't know the original song actually, but they made It's Around. And so one of them would start, rose, 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 rose of raspberries, how we hate you. And then the next one would go, and they'd be out there picking rose, 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 rose.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. But, like right now, my youngest, she's living in Germany. I mean, all my kids are in Europe, and my youngest is in Germany. And her husband built a tiny home, and they put it in this like little German neighborhood, on a lot that belonged to his dad right next to his parents' place. And they just put in their first garden, and they're permaculturing, and the whole neighborhood's just like binoculars, what they're loving it, actually, just watching these two, right? Just
Yeah.
doing his thing. And my son has gardened on his tiny balcony. Like he lives in Berlin, and he's got this little balcony that, I don't know, maybe it's like 3 feet by 2.5 feet. Like, you can just stand out, right?
Sure.
He's got window boxes and, tomatoes and all peppers and all this stuff going on. So yeah, when you expose your kids to that, they just can't do without it.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Like they really need it. They feel like it's missing.
Yeah. No, that rings true to me. I think it's the way I returned to it, because when you're 14, 15 years old, it's the last thing that you
Oh
care
yeah,
about.
like
But
garden, whatever.
yeah. But when I encountered, like a pretty, I mean, this gets into my actual story if we wanted to go in that direction.
Yeah,
But
let's do that.
yeah, so when I moved out so I grew up here in Michigan, where I'm currently located. And when I graduated high school, I moved out to Washington State, where I went to have you ever heard of Moody Bible Institute?
Yes, yeah.
So I applied to their campus in Chicago, but they have like a satellite campus out in Spokane, Washington.
Okay.
So I went to that satellite campus in Spokane, Washington, which is their aviation campus, where they train bush pilots and stuff, like missionary pilots. But that was not me. They happily offered like a generic biblical studies degree, which I did coursework in that, and I deeply enjoyed it. But it wasn't long before a variety of different events transpired that led to a complete and total, like, I would consider it like a nervous breakdown or psychological collapse that eventually, you know, led to me moving back home because of how unbearable it was, and like that the healing process for me was getting back into gardening. I mean,
Yeah.
it was truly like and it probably helped. Like I continued going to school when I came back here and went to a local Christian university here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's called Cornerstone University. And my professor was really he was like a Wendell Berry fanatic
Oh, nice.
scholar, ran a CSA farm, had a couple head of cattle and had pigs and had turkeys and chickens. And so it was just like his lifestyle as he's teaching me, Plato and all, I'm like, and I was digging. Well, what happened was I was deconstructing
Yes.
my entire conception, not only of my faith, but my entire conception of reality. I mean,
Yeah.
it was beyond my understanding of faith. It was metaphysics. It was every,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
take a course in postmodern theory, and it's just like you've completely you've atomized everything that I've ever
Held dear.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
have relativized all of it now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now I have no way of orienting myself in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
and
Oh,
and so let me put my hands in the soil.
yeah.
And that was how I reconstructed, was literally going to like what you talk about, the metaphor here, grassroots.
Yes, I
Going to
know.
the
I know.
grassroots.
As soon as you start digging in the dirt, all the metaphors come alive.
Yeah.
They do. They literally, that was the first thing that happened to me. We moved to Telegraph Creek, and I know it's not even the right word, but we went to visit some friends, came home, and all our horses had gotten out, and they were standing around their hay for the winter, right? Which we like had calculated it right down to the last straw kind of thing. And it was super expensive to have it shipped up to this remote place, right?
Yeah.
Having horses was kind of like a dumb idea there, but anyway, we did that. And we drove up the driveway, and I was like, oh my God, you know, they're in the hay. And the kids are like, the horses are having a hay day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, interesting. No. And then it was just, I can't even think of the examples, but it was just like, oh, got your goat. That was another one, you know, because, you know, I had goats, right? And I had to deal with them, and they're just so ornery, and they're always into trouble, and they're always doing something they shouldn't be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get so angry that you didn't even know yourself. Like you were like, who is this person? You know, that because you'd just be so, and then this really got your goat, didn't he? I'd be like, oh my God, yes. You know, and so all these dead metaphors just came springing up, you know, and that was when it was like a reanimation of Sophia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oh man, where do I even begin? Because that whole subject has just awakened so many sensibilities within my own self. Because I when I went through whatever you want to call it, depression, anxiety, dark night of the soul, psychological collapse, whatever, psychosis. I mean, what do you want? What language do you want to use to describe the bottom of the U? That's, I experienced it, and it was full on existential suicidality. Like, I mean, it was all of it, and it was a darkness that I can't even begin to grasp in the language that I'm not now using, because I'm not there anymore. Like, I can't even touch it anymore with language. And I can try, but I mean, it make me weep to even begin to approach it.
Yes.
And all that to say is, in the recovery process, or even before the recovery had to take place, there's so much in me that had to die. And even my understanding of who God was and how he interacted with me personally, and even the ways in which I thought that he had interacted with me prior to those events, like all of that had to die. And not that I don't have relics of that currently, and they're very important to me, but like so much of that had to vanish before whatever new was going to emerge. And when it emerged, it wasn't in the way I wanted it to. And so there was,
you know what, that would be a perfect line if you could draw a little cartoon of a caterpillar when he becomes a butterfly. He's like, what the? You know, exactly. I'm not crawling anymore, really. I'm not eating leaves either. Like, what are we doing, man?
Well, this whole way of being in the world has to completely shift. In fact, it has to look backwards in some ways. It has to look like the complete exact like antithesis of what it once was. You know?
I know. I mean, the caterpillar is flying now.
Yeah.
Like that.
And it was
how I get around. I just kind of jump up and then fly.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh my goodness.
I know, it's terrifying. Like we always look at the metamorphosis of these animals, right? The ones we know from nature as oh, the caterpillar's now a beautiful butterfly. But think about the traumatic event that's going on in that cocoon,
Yeah.
you know, and I like to just kind of put myself there, because what you're describing at the bottom of the you, that's you in the cocoon transforming,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal. And I imagine that's what it's like for that caterpillar. It's like, oh, what's that in my back? Why are these things coming out the top of my head? And
Is this worth
my
doing?
tongue so long?
Yeah, like, is this even, this process is so painful. Is
Yeah,
this worth,
it's worth it. And I just want to be a caterpillar. I just want to be
Yeah.
what I was.
And yeah, and you don't know enough about what you're becoming to even
No,
desire it.
no, you can't
Don't you-
desire it. It's mystery to you.
Yeah.
A mystery. It's a total mystery.
Yeah.
That's why I think whenever I see a butterfly, that just cocooned, right? Just came out of the cocoon and sitting on a branch, I'm like, it's probably going, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or even a dragonfly larva, you know?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Like we've got lots of water around here, and I often find I actually last year I was walking past one of the ponds, and a brand new one landed on me, because I must have fluttered it up from the tall grass, and it was like, I'm not ready, man. you know and I'm like, well, hello, welcome to the world. So some of them are in their 7 years as nymphs,
Sure.
and then all of a sudden they're like freaking made, amazing, like helicopters, right?
It's wild. You know what's really funny? And this is just coming to me as we're talking, but like when you tie flies, as a fly fisherman, one of the practices that I've kept for many years now is tying flies, and they have this certain pattern, which is amorphous, called an emerger. And it is literally the emergence of basically a nymph stage, uh, basically a pupate insect, into its fully blossomed form. But in the pattern between it, there's so many different stages of metamorphosis that is taking place that there is no specific pattern to tie. There's like millions of patterns that you can tie, and it doesn't even get that specific. And so like in this in-between stage, you can make up your own pattern. You can pull out an insect from the river and look at it, and you could try to imitate that. But like oftentimes it's like you can kind of just tie this like haphazard looking little thing, and it'll still catch fish. Like it doesn't even need to be specific in that regards. It's like it doesn't need to be, what kind of language would Vervaeke use? It doesn't need to be, I don't even know. I go weird in that regard.
No, that's really fascinating, because it's like this, the transition period. The one in the middle that you're talking about is literally chaos, right? If there's no pattern, no distinct pattern to it, and that is precisely how you feel when when you're down in there. That's why it's terrifying to even talk about. I know the feeling. I've been there, right? So you don't, that just swirls on its own out there, and you just don't want to get too close to it.
And you kind of have to let it be. I mean, and that's what Rilke is just constantly beating on about again and again through like so many different poems, but then in also his prose, he's just constantly saying like,
just chill out, man.
You have to go through it. You have patience, like solitude, even though, I mean, to be fair, I think you've even had a critique against full-on solitude, because these things do need to take place within a community too.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, you have to be, I mean, when I was in the chaos, I needed support. I needed community. I needed people to, because I was like literally going, did I say that right? You know, like it was just right down to the primitive. Am I talking okay? You
Yeah.
know, should I have laughed there or should I have cried? Like all the basic questions, right?
Gone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you need that kind of feedback, even if it's just an expression, even if someone just looks at you oddly. Okay, well, you took that information in and you're like, okay, really shouldn't have said that at that moment. Right, that was inappropriate.
Yeah.
but 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 there is a place for solitude when you've passed through it all,
Yeah.
in my opinion. When you have passed through it all, and because it's not solitary, it's solitude. And it's actually a form of communion with Sophia,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
That's what I believe. And that's what's been happening to me since, you know, like I pretty much was recovered by 2013. And I had a car accident and had suffered a brain injury, and that happened in 2007. And so it took me a long time, right? I was like little old Nebuchadnezzar, just
Oh,
acting like a very strange creature.
yeah.
And then, yeah, 2013, it really did feel like a pupating, you know, like an emergence of some kind. It was like all of a sudden, wow, you know.
Yeah.
And then I started on in my solitude,
Yeah.
in my solitude. And a lot of it had to do also because of the mental health issues. I had to learn to draw boundaries in order not to overwhelm myself, right? And because it had been such a close call with death, I
Mhm.
knew that if I let myself get into that place again, I was going to die. So it literally became a question of life and death
Yeah.
for me. And my boundaries weren't disordered. They were ordered boundaries. Before I had disordered boundaries. I had agoraphobia, so I didn't go outside.
Sure.
Those were disordered boundaries, okay?
Yeah.
But in this emergent state, I had ordered boundaries, and the reason they were ordered was because they were for the service of others. That's how I would put it. So I had to make sure that I could be of good service to other people, right? And the only way I could do that was to look after myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything was oriented toward the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know exactly, well, maybe not exactly, but at least what I can touch on is after going through that experience,
Mm-hmm.
the depth of whatever that was in the truly coming to the closest that I've ever come so far to death. and it, all I can do is like put a weird sheepish laugh around it, but it's like it is I mean I had to reorient my entire life, and at that point I had to put in all these protections.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm taking away those protections slowly inching away from like all this like that recovery process. It has been and has continued to be. I mean, that's been an entire decade of my life now. So like that happened in my early 20s. Now I'm in my early 30s, and it's like, and now I don't even know whether or not I will encounter something even worse. So who knows? You know, like there's so much more room for that. So and who knows if God's even preparing individuals or all of us to go through something far worse than what we've already experienced. But at the same time, it's those protections are very important, but there's also this like way in which I'm still sort of like trying to figure out what I'm still holding on to of that experience, what I'm still like, because like I am terrified. I'm
Yes.
still I'm still so fearful. Like I go to this thing. I'm an avid skateboarder. I love skateboarding. I go to skate church on Tuesday nights. It's the only church I attend, and
Oh, nice.
it's a skateboarding like situation where we just skateboard, and then we have this little like testimonial slash 10-minute talk period, and I am terrified every single week. And I only do this like maybe once or twice a month, and then the other people share. There's other guys that are around my age that share, and it's only 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long, but I'm terrified to get in front of these people and say, these kids, and say anything of actual meaning to them. Because number one, I don't know whether or not I know their language. Number two, I'm so fragile still. And number three, it's like all these, I don't even know if my understanding of the, like I feel like I've got like an attachment disorder with God to a certain degree because of like not only my previous understanding of God, but like my, I don't want to say new, but like
Developing.
a developing and ever broadening understanding of God, scales continually falling off my eyes, and like every single week my relationship with God is just taking on new dimensions, and I can't even begin with my ADD spinny brain to begin to like articulate what it is that I could potentially share. But like each time I face my fears, this exposure to this event that's occurring, and I'm getting up there at bat and I'm swinging. I'm not trying to evangelize anybody or what have you. I'm just trying to like be as honest as I possibly can with these kids. And it's like, sometimes I do hit a foul ball, but there's a lot of times where all of a sudden it's like, I don't even know what just occurred in the last 10 minutes, but I've said something to the extent where now I've got a kid talking to me, or multiple kids talking to me, and it's like, yo, I don't even know, I feel like I'm a heretic. This imposter syndrome, I struggle with imposter syndrome
Okay, so I got a few
so
things.
badly.
I got some things to say.
Yeah.
First of all, when you go through any kind of mental instability, the first thing that you lose is yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And because you don't know who you were or who you are, everything that you say sounds like someone else is saying it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't, yeah.
You're going, is that right? And then you go through this phase where you really have lost trust in yourself, right? And you don't know if anything that you're talking about makes any sense, because you've had all this distortion, right? And you're constantly asking yourself, do I sound like a crazy person? Right? And I mean, I don't think there's any prescription for getting out of that, but I think what I learned for myself was, first of all, slow and steady wins the race became my motto, right? Just slow and steady, man. Just one day at a time, 1 minute at a time, right? And And when you slow everything down and become more present, suddenly you're able to have these little successes, right?
Yeah.
One after the other. And as they build, so does your confidence in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I always had really strong intuitions, but I never knew it. It was just really weird. I grew up in a home with a mother who's very intuitive, and my sister was very much like that. But their intuition played out in judgy ways. So it would be like they'd meet someone, and then they'd be all nice to them, and then the person would leave, and they'd say, "I don't like him."
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I used to, because I'm the justice girl. Like I'm, that if there was a superhero for justice, that would have been me, right? Seriously.
Yeah.
And so I would always be like, you can't say that. You don't even know that person, so I hated their intuition, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hated it because it always came out in this judgy way,
Mm-hmm.
And yet I had intuitions, obviously. Like I just knew it was wrong what they were doing, right? And I also had intuitions about what was just and what was unjust. If I saw someone being mean to someone, sometimes it was okay, maybe they deserved it, and other times it was really not good, and I had to step in, and so I was totally operating on my intuition, but I didn't know it. I thought I was smart. Right? I thought it was all coming from here, but it was actually all coming from here.
Yeah.
And I was also, I'm more what do you call that? Introverted. So I was always just quiet and watching the goings on, and all the judgments that I was making were mostly in my head. I didn't say them out loud, but after I had, after I recovered and I started to really enjoy my solitude, and it wasn't a solitude that I was alone in, it was because I was walking with God in that solitude, and he was the kindest and the most gentlest to me, right? And all of the information coming to me was just in tiny, like bite-sized pieces, right? It was like chicken soup for the soul, That's what God was doing. He's like, oh, it's okay, Shari, just have a little bit more. and then I'd say, well, geez, that's funny, because I always thought that. Or I knew that.
Yeah.
And now it is that, and so then I was realizing that I actually had a good intuition, and that helped me to trust myself, right? And that's a really hard journey to make, because you basically have to start from scratch, which means you need to be really broken.
Yeah. Yeah, what you're saying rings true to me in what I feel right now is like one of the things that has been a hallmark of my entire life, because like supposedly, after praying the sinner's prayer at 3 years old, and supposedly Christ entering my life and living inside of me and all these things, like for whatever reason, I could never trust that event occurred.
Yeah.
That age. And so I continued to rededicate myself to Christ for 100 times a year,
Right.
like for the next foreseeable future. And it's still a product of my life now. And now it is this daily surrender to Christ. And it's almost like this weird irony that has come about in my life, because it's like this rededication that I was so insecure about has been like this product of my life now. But like one insecurity that I'm trying to like wrap my head around was this this indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Like I had this very this deep insecurity that I did not know God, yet I
Mhm.
still had this intuition that was continuing to reveal to me, even though I couldn't probably see it, because we can't see ourselves very clearly, certainly not in a mirror. Like here I am trying to look at like what's happening outside of me, you
Yeah.
know, as like a way of informing me, whether or not it's through the eyes of other people or it's through my reflection in other things. I was constantly taking in this information and trying to discern like not only my value, but like even my like who I was as a Christian or person of faith or whatever. And it was truly believing that like I either knew God or I didn't know God, or like
It was like binary, right? Like it was like
yeah.
either you're in or you're out.
Yeah.
Of
Oh yeah. And I mean that was how I was raised.
course.
That
Me
was
too.
yeah.
But I never had that thought because I don't know if I ever mentioned it if you watched a video about it, but I had an experience as a 5-year-old thinking about death. And did you hear that story already?
This sounds really familiar to me.
Okay.
I think
Well, I'll just keep it really short, but I realized that the thing thinking about me thinking about dying doesn't die. I had that insight at the age of 5.
yeah.
Yeah. And then in my mind's eye, I saw myself as this little glowing orb that kind of just went up. And then there was all these other glowing orbs, but they formed a corpus. I'll say it like that.
Sure.
And the thing that was me, right? The thing that was thinking about me thinking was in this orb, and it went up. And I felt, I thought of it later in my life, and I thought, why wasn't I freaked out by that? Because as a 5-year-old, you'd really want to be you, right? But it didn't seem to bother me as long as that thing, that essential, that essence of me was preserved, because I knew that somehow I knew, and it's actually, he talks about it in Meditations on the Tarot,
Mhm.
that doesn't die. There's no possible way. I just knew that. And I knew that my body would die, but
Mhm.
that didn't really matter to me. Right.
Sure.
And so that experience I never doubted who I was as a spiritual being and where I was going.
Mm.
Right. And it wasn't like I didn't grow up. I think I was talking about, growing up. I didn't ask Jesus into my heart when I was 3 or anything. My parents didn't go to church.
Yeah. I
I
know,
just
a strange experience.
I just had that experience, and that all that other stuff, came into our family when I was about 14. So, that just, I just knew. I don't even know why I knew, but this is the intuition that as I grew older, that I failed to realize I had, right? Weirdly enough. And, but I did have to go through a similar process, because my parents became Christians, and then I had to go to church, and I wasn't really in that world very long, because that happened when I was 14, and when I was 17, I left home. But I was pretty indoctrinated with it.
Yeah.
And it was extremely conservative form of Calvinism, right?
Mm.
And so it's not Christianity light, that's for sure. Like,
No.
it's pretty much Christianity heavy, eh? In my opinion.
No, and I mean, I think in a big way, I'm still sort of in the process of my own I think we can be in the process of deconstruction and reconstruction at the exact same time. And they're like,
Of course.
as in the process of becoming, it's like there's still so much embedded in my own psyche from my childhood that I'm still living out of. It's like depending on the day, I'm living out of my 3-year-old self or my 10-year-old self or my 16-year-old self. And so it's like, and all of that's still in there and it's still working and it's still fucking with me,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and like I think having that awareness is good, but I don't always have that awareness, and so I'll be, you know, on a bender in my 3-year-old self for 3 weeks or whatever, and I can't escape these torments, and then you might receive relief or what have you. But yeah, no, that was, I think it was particularly hard. Like, so like I would say that like my childhood upbringing was operating with like, you know, if we're Trinitarians or what have you, which it doesn't matter to me, but uh it's or it does to a certain extent, but
Mhm,
there's um this very necessary piece of the Trinity that I did not receive, that I did not understand, and that was the Holy Spirit. And to this day, I don't think I have an understanding of how the Holy Spirit's even supposed to function in people's lives, because I grew up, without, well, in a very like a hyper sensationalist sort of uh, upbringing, but then like when I went to Bible school, surprisingly, even at a very conservative cessationist sort of place like Moody Bible Institute, I
yeah.
encountered not only kids from Bethel School of the Supernatural, which was like one of my best friends was from Bethel, which, that's training in supernatural ministry,
Mhm.
and there was other people and there was like the circle that I ran with where, it was like words of knowledge and prophetic words of knowledge, and it was all sorts of really strange spiritual practices, like opening up your mind as a canvas for the Holy Spirit to paint on it, and let's just go around in a circle and tell what the Holy Spirit's painting on our minds.
Oh,
And
wow.
like that was bizarre. And then like, my friend in particular, I one thing that I've always collected is feathers, and I loved duck feathers, and I constantly had a duck feather necklace on me. I didn't even take it off when I showered because
It
guess
was a
what?
doctor there.
It's a duck feather. Why would you take it? Why would it sheds water all naturally? So it's like silly, but I love feathers. And he told me, he was like, well, dude, at Bethel, like feathers would fall from the ceiling when we would worship. Like there was moments where the layer between these different realms or dimensions or what have you is so thin that feathers would fall from the ceiling. And I wanted to experience that kind
Yeah,
of manifestation. I wanted God to manifest himself.
yeah,
I wanted God to reach down from heaven and slug me in the face. It's like I
right,
wanted
right.
a, like, like there was, I wanted the tangibility. I wanted like a very material sort of
Yeah, yeah,
manifestation from God. And you know, um, I didn't receive it in the way that I wanted to, but we went and we went to Portland one weekend to see Sufjan Stevens, who I don't know if you've heard of him, but
yeah, I know, yeah.
yeah, he's, I think he's a Christian. I mean, he's got an album called Seven Swans that I still listen to today, which is one of the most beautiful albums I've ever heard. And
Right.
um, anyways, all that to say is we were at this concert, and I was praying. And not only was I praying that night, but I was praying for weeks that God would send me a feather.
Mhm.
And I was praying, and I'm looking at the ceiling. Like my orientation is upwards. I'm looking at the ceiling, praying that God would just release a feather for me,
Yeah.
and that didn't happen, but the concert went on, and at some point it came to the finale, and he's playing this song called Impossible Soul, which is a 21-minute song, and he's on stage, and he's got his Sufjan Stevens, he wears wings. He wears
Oh,
these beautiful goose wings, these white, maybe they're probably swan wings. What am I saying?
yeah,
They're
swan.
swan wings. And and he's on stage, and everybody from up in the stage came like up in the balcony came down to the general admission. Like everybody is now on the floor, and we're all just having this like, almost like transcendent experience during this final song. And I kid you not, one of the feathers from his wing like dislodged, and I'm watching this take place, and it's like wafts off of his wing and is like floats down into the general admission, and
Yeah.
and at that point I'm like, I'm getting that feather.
Yeah.
And so I'm like looking between people's legs and stuff like that, and I find this feather that comes off of Sufjan Stevens' wings, and I grab it. I grab that feather, and I'm like, when I think back on it, it all seems so silly, but at the same time, it was like, that was the feather that God gave me, because it's like, here it was, like, it wasn't even that hard to find. It like wafted off stage, came down, and I find the feather, I pick it up, I put it in my pocket, and I'm like, oh, God answers my prayers.
Yeah.
Like I've been praying for this feather. And
Yeah.
that was this weird shift where instead of God revealing himself out of left field, he's revealing himself to me in this way that it not only is it more, so it's gentle, it's not outside of the mundane, it's embedded in the mundane, it's through material reality that he is revealing himself to me, but I have to have the eyes to see it, and I have to like lose all expectations of how God's going to reveal himself to me, and just allow what material reality has. So I just have to.
You're in a receiving mode.
Yeah.
This is the difference. We talked about that in the last conversation with Michael Martin, how there's this reaching out and taking, right? Which Eve did in the garden. She reached out and took the apple. And when you're in that right orientation with God, you're not reaching out and taking, you're waiting expectantly, right? And to receive. And see, this is the thing I think Jesus is talking about when he said, if you ask him for a loaf of bread, is he going to give you a stone, kind of thing. And the hard part, I think, for a lot of people, and this is the thing that I've had to learn, is that for God, a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day, right? and so you have to wait.
Yeah, like
it's just that simple. Like this stuff is not hard. Like
how many times I've been told I'm impatient.
Yeah.
So impatient.
And I mean, and the thing is, when God gives you something, it's usually when you least expect it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like your feather, right? You're in the moment, you're doing the thing, and it's great. And then all of a sudden, something else becomes way more important than what's actually happening. And it's that feather, right? And yeah, that just seems to me the way God is. Like, he's just so, when I think about God, I think about someone who's just so lovely and also has a really good sense of humor. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna give him the feather off Sufjan Stevens' wings.
Yeah. And it's kind of like in this weird, like, F you kind of way.
Right?
Like
You want a feather?
you're looking up. No, dude, you're gonna have to look down. You're gonna have to look in completely different directions. Like, if you want to encounter me, if you want to encounter who I am,
Look
like,
around.
yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
look around.
Yeah. Like, you've gotta have your aperture like way,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's in your periphery that I'm
Yeah.
gonna show up. It's not in your focal point. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, because when you're focused in on something, you're actually in a predatory mode, right? You're reaching out and taking something. Like, you're
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
No, it very much does remind me of um Anados in
Oh
Fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an amazing book.
Yeah, it is. I
That's
mean,
going to be a regular, like, for me, that feels almost like a pilgrimage,
mm,
right? Reading it.
yeah.
And that's going to be a regular pilgrimage, that book.
Yeah, I
It just
think
has to
so.
be.
Yeah,
Um,
and I've only gone through it once. So, I mean, to glean what I need to glean in order to have a conversation about it is just not even possible.
yeah, no, I know. Even me, like, I was a little worried because you were saying you want to talk about Fantasties, and I'm like, oh, crap,
Yeah,
because where do you start?
I
Like,
know.
like, where do you start?
Yeah.
You could start with the fountain that appears in his room, or the lady in his, the lady in his father's testament, or you could. There's so many places to go, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and somehow it just feels like you don't want to massacre it. You don't want to just dissect it. You just,
No.
you know.
Yeah. You really don't. And I think that conversation can certainly be saved for another time.
Sure.
But it's just, I think probably the thing that stood out to me the most was um, just the encounter with his the encounter with the shadow, with
Mm-hmm.
with his with this experience that sort of blocks, like, we talk about enchantment, and I know for my experience of reality is very much this, like, I was enchanted as a child, I became disenchanted.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was my encounter with my shadow or what have you, but all I know is I know that it's possible to become enchanted again. And that is what I'm in the process of trying to begin, like in
You
part,
know,
and I don't even think I'm in control of that,
no, you're not actually. You're not in control of that. That's the feather, right?
Yeah.
That is the feather. And I thought about that. I thought about the shadow. I think I was talking to Jason Almontree about it. And I said, oh, I don't know who I was talking to about it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't think the shadow is, like, there's so much talk about shadows in this metaphysical world,
Yeah,
like
there is.
the internet, right? And a lot of people right away think of Jung and his version of the shadow. And I don't think George MacDonald was thinking about the shadow in those terms at all.
No.
I think so, this is the simplistic mind that I have, but a shadow is cast when the sun shines on a material object, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if the sun shines on a tree, it casts a long shadow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the shadow can only exist in a material world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting it.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what George is talking about.
Yeah. No, I think so too. And oh, man, it does, like that, the awareness of what's so hard for me is like, because I can recall the wonder that I had as a child, and I have been chasing that. Like what did I say? I like at one point I used to ride dragons.
Right.
Now I only chase them. Like
Yeah.
I used like the fantasy worlds. Like I could just tell my friend, dude, I'm a leopard, and I
Yeah.
became a leopard.
Yeah.
Like it in that childhood imagination and in the fantasy world that I could live inside of. And I'm not saying that that's the world that like I should have permanently belonged in. And I believe that might not be the world that I'm actually seeking necessarily now, but like that imaginative space is just, I mean, there's something that's sought after. Like I cannot wait to bring my son down to the creek to catch frogs, because I can remember the joy that I had and the wonder of catching a frog with my bare hands and throwing it into the bucket. And you know what I hated was the fact that my dad dumped that bucket out, because we had to release the frogs. But like he had the knowledge that like, like you're gonna kill these frogs, kid.
Yeah.
But like it was that wonder and that excitement. And I'm reliving it slowly with my own son right now. And
That's what I was going to say. Like, and your son will be blessed in that you remember that, like, I think so many people project themselves so far into the future that they're like twice removed from their childhood, and then they have children and everything is just forward thinking, and I think that hinders the development of the child's imagination, and one of the things I remember raising my kids was that I knew exactly how they felt. And I loved it because I could relive my childhood through them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, enjoying their wonder, but I seriously was almost jealous that they could go up to the creek with their plastic dinosaurs and just be gone for 4 hours because they were in another land, right? And they could hear them, and I'm like listening for the dinosaurs, and so when my kids would come in all excited about something, like, they build a fort and they'd come and see our fort, and I'd go down. And as an adult, I could switch in and out. Like as an adult, I could go, this is a fort, like 2 sticks and a couple of branches, but then I would go into childhood mode and I was just like, wow, and they'd say, yeah, here's the bathroom. And I'd be like, that's amazing. What a great idea. And then, because I could be there with them in it. Right. And my kids still have all that wonder, and they're adults.
Mm-hmm.
So no, you can't go back. Right. No. And you're not supposed to go back.
No, you can't.
You can't. But I actually think you're also not supposed to project yourself into the future. You need to be present And that's the beauty of raising children, is that you can participate in a childlike way with them. You can wonder at a really good story that you're telling them. You can be there with them, you know? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Douglas Harding, but he talks about this so well. I can send you the link to the video. It's just a short 4 stages of life, it's called.
Okay.
And so, you know, his 4 stages are a babe, an infant, a toddler, a teenager, and a sage. And the sage, he says most people stay in teenagerhood. That's where they remain, right? And I won't give it all away. I'll let you watch the video. But the sage is the adult who reintegrates their childhood, right? And I think you have the advantage, just as I do, in that I remember it. You know?
Yeah.
And that's good. That's a really good thing. Yeah.
That's, yeah. I mean, I think there's so much like rebirth imagery going on in my mind right now. And you know, it's the death that is also life. And it is, you know, but it's also this, you know, having the faith like a child. And
you know, I recently had a dream. I'll tell you this dream because I think it's pertinent. I had a dream that, and you know, dreams, they're just weird. So I'm just going to tell it and let it lay. But there was this abandoned mall, and you know, you get this narrative about the dream before it starts happening, right? So you know already that this mall is abandoned. Why, I don't know. And there's 2 men living in like there's people living in it, and there's 2 men living in it in this part, and they are called the witnesses. That's all I know. They're called the witnesses, and I'm in some vantage point. I can't see myself, so I'm just looking at the scene, and I see this group of men outside. They're all dressed in black, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and they have this huge box, and they say, let's just put it in there and let the serpent out, and close the door, and it'll find them and kill them. And so they shove this giant box in, and then they close the door, and they're all outside, you know, waiting. And the box opens up, and this massive serpent comes out. Like, there's an upper floor to this mall, and its head is already at the upper floor, and the tail hasn't come out of the box yet. It's just huge, eh? And it's just seeking to devour. Like, it's just in this mode. And it finds these 2 witnesses and kills them. And suddenly I realized that there's a child in one of the rooms in this mall. And so while this snake is off, you know, its head is somewhere down the hallway, I go and grab this little child, and she's wearing a little nightie, and I can feel the warmth of her body, and you know, the tenderness of her skin, and she's very quiet, you know, and I pick her up, and I'm holding her kind of almost close to my lap, right? Like, not up here, but she's maybe like 4, 5, something like that. And I start heading up this back hallway and up these stairs, and I think I'm in a stairwell, but then at one of the landings, it's a bedroom, and there's these 2 teenage girls in there, and they're both different ages. And I'm surprised. I'm holding this child, and I'm saying, "Oh, I didn't know this was your bedroom. I'm really sorry. I'm just making my way through." And then I kind of, the stairs continued up past, and they were like, "Oh, it's okay." And then I went up past, and I went up another set of stairs, and there was another bedroom. And then there was another set of stairs that went up, and they ended at the ceiling. And in this last bedroom, there was an old woman sitting in the bed. And I didn't see her directly. I walked into this room with this child, and there was a mirror on the wall, and I could see her in the mirror. And then I looked at her and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just apologizing, right? Because I'm walking into these people's bedrooms." And she didn't say anything. She just smiled. And then I looked at her in the mirror. And when I looked at her in the mirror, she spoke to me. If I looked at her, she didn't say anything. And she started transforming in the mirror. So I think there's something in my room that I'm allergic to.
Oh, no.
Because this has happened to me before, where I bought a candle once and it just choked me to death. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is because anyway,
No,
I just want to finish this quickly. But so when I looked in the mirror, she spoke to me, but it was like kind of a mental telepathy, and she was transforming. And at one point she turned into a lion, and she had her hair. She always had her hair, right? And then she turned into an ape. And then she turned into a young woman, and then an old woman, and her hair would go, up and down. And I'm trying to remember what I said to her. Oh yeah, I was like, "Who are you?" And then I went, "Wait a minute, you're me." Right? And I thought about this dream afterwards, and I'm like, it was all me. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know who the witnesses were. That's still a mystery to me. But I was carrying this child to safety.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
yeah, wow.
Right. And I went through the stages of my life, like the teenagerhood, and then the old woman, and how she was transforming constantly, right, throughout her life.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm so glad I was carrying that child. Right? I never let the child die.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, you have to be like a little child
Mm-hmm.
to enter the kingdom. And then recently I saw an icon of the Theotokos. I think Jonathan Peugeot was talking about why Christ is held in a certain position low on the Theotokos, right? I can't remember what he said, but that was the exact same position that I held that child.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
I know, right? Yeah.
I want to now you have me curious as to why.
And then you have this
important.
And then you have this idea of Christ in you, right? In order to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a little child.
Mm. In what is the weirdest part about Christ in you is that it is the partaking in his death, that it is in his death that this process of transformation is occurring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what passage of scripture. I think it was 2 Corinthians or something that I was reading. And I'm reading it in front of these kids, who are like 14, 15 years old, and trying to explain to them, the process of death and rebirth and the dying to one's own appetites or the flesh, and just I have no idea whether or not these concepts are landing with these kids or just
Yeah, but I mean, if you remember the child in you,
mm-hmm.
you'll never underestimate them.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
That's one weird thing is I'm trying my best to realize that these kids are way smarter than
they look.
Yeah, then they look, or what I can fathom,
Yeah, like you're looking, it's like that scene in Fantastes when he sees the little boy, right? Mm-hmm. And his shadow falls across, right? And suddenly he's just a plain old boy with a couple broken toys. That's what you're looking at. You have to you have to see them as magical, right? Because they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness. Yeah. Yeah. That's been one of the strangest features of my life that has developed, is just this. I never thought that I would be in front of a bunch of like teenagers talking to them about God. And now here I am. And it is, I don't even, like I said earlier, I don't feel like I deserve to be in that situation. But luckily I'm surrounded by these guys who so, I mean, they're just a bunch of skater dudes. So they're just not filled with the kind of judgment that I feel like maybe if I was in maybe
Yeah.
in a
Or
church building, if I
formal
was in a
setting.
church building or what have you,
Yeah.
it would be different. Or
Yeah.
uh, it's just, we're just all pals, and we all have our own unique sort of uh, journey with our understanding of who God is and how he interacts with us. And we
Well,
each,
honestly, though, I mean, even in a church building, every single person sitting there has their own understanding of God,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
right? Like,
I know.
there's people in AA on the Discord. Chad comes to mind,
Yeah.
Chad the alcoholic. And he's like, it's all right if people have a God of their own understanding. And some Christians are like, what?
Isn't that
Oh,
all we have?
that's all we have. That's right. And so what's a heretic? We're
Exactly.
all heretics because we all have an image of God. We all have a God of our, that's all we can do.
It's
Right?
like when you look at the color green and I look at the color green, we can both call it green, but we don't know if we're looking at the same thing. And
No.
so it's, yeah, I think that's what's extremely bizarre about the whole thing. And yeah, that goes in so many directions.
It
I,
does.
I apologize if my exhaustion is affecting my language, but I'm getting to that point where
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know how much longer I can actually go.
Yeah, we can talk another time, anytime, Luke.
Yeah.
You did mention once in the comment section that you had a story about what was it? When you were talking about the feather, I was thinking maybe you're going to work up to it. Remember
Oh man. Uh,
the dead bird in the grill of the car or something like that? I can't remember.
yeah. No, there's that. Well, that's just the whole.
I
Yeah,
thought you were going to tell me that's how you found your feather.
I know. Which I'm constantly in a state of like embellishing like little clips in my own mind, and I think that was one of them. It was taking my feather story but making it a little more bloody, because I have this I have this ongoing poem, and it's called Prayers, but it's like just constantly thanking God for like these weird, like
Oh, I'd love to see them sometime.
constantly thanking God for just like the weird inconsistencies,
Yeah.
just these weird, whatever. Just the language is bizarre, that it's like thanking God for the things that are broken,
Mm-hmm.
because the things that are broken are what life is made of. I can't encounter things that aren't broken. Everything's broken, but everything will be made new. And it's like
Yeah.
appreciating the things as they exist right now,
Right.
because those things are ultimately what will be made new. And and I think maybe they're already being made new, maybe they already are made new, and I have failed to see. My vision fails to see how new they are, and
Yeah.
how
Well, that's where time is your friend, right? Like you can like this is the thing, you can only know the goodness of God
yeah,
when you look back over things. And I think that I personally think that that's why they describe the journey in the Orthodox Church as a climbing of a mountain, because the vista opens. It's bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can see further and further and further, right?
Yeah.
And you know, for those fellow travelers who are down at the bottom of the mountain just getting started, they don't see what other people see, you know, and how can you tell them what you're seeing? You can't.
No, you
You
can't.
can't.
You want to though, because you want to share.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think
I
finding,
just keep
I
feeling
think
like
that's
you know, like we have this coming out of evangelical Protestantism, you have this urge to want to tell people, right?
yeah, you do.
And I gave up on that years ago.
Yeah,
And I just feel like now it's like all I really want to do is just
bear with
encourage
it.
them to keep going. Just keep going.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
keep
no, that's because I think that's the venture in and of itself. It's that
yeah.
just surviving to a certain degree. But all, I mean, that language is overused, but the, yeah, you know, it's, I think what always keeps me in check is this is supposed to be good news that I'm sharing, right? You know, and oftentimes it's I've realized that all the methods that I've supposedly learned, like I'm a faint-hearted evangelist. Like I just do not have.
You know what? Honestly, I never believed that evangelism was what God wanted us to do.
Yeah,
I never believed that. And it was because of the parable of the sower,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And I thought, we're just supposed to be sowing. That's all we're supposed to be doing. And we're not supposed to determine where all these seeds fall.
yeah. Or fishing, like another
Yeah,
metaphor, you know,
yeah.
like
Fishing, fishers of men. Yes.
yeah. Mm. Um, I've got a I think so. Like, I've got a poem that I'd love to share with you because I have not. Um, it's just about blueberries.
Oh, awesome.
you you talked about that was remarkable when hearing you talk about the blueberry story. Just it because it's my I have the same story but with nuthatches. Like
Oh, awesome.
I didn't know nuthatches were a thing like
Right.
5 months ago, but now I'm just utterly fascinated with red-breasted nuthatches, and I don't know how I didn't know they existed prior. It's just like it. So like,
Oh, right. The whole world opened up to you.
yeah, the whole world opened up, and I think that that's the way in which my re my association with gardening from an early age, and then it just completely disappearing from my life, but like reemerging later on and being important. But it was at such a fragile point. Like I needed grounding, and it was the only place I knew where to turn, and it just so happens to be the place where the whole story begins. But um yeah, I was, you know, probably at my lowest point, but I had begun my degree in creative writing, and I had started writing. So this is a poem that I think I wrote in like 2014 or 13 or something like that. And I I still love it because, and I think it might be too explicit, but that's, I gotta stop.
Oh, no, no. If you love it, it's
But
probably great. It's probably great.
I'm gonna read it to you. So this is
Okay.
this is Blueberry Bruce. Planted a sandy pile far back past the swing set, in full sun over top of that dead dog buried there. And as worms ribbon in the bones of my good friend, I see him leaping from the grave full of flavor, those throbbing red drupelets shimmering in the breeze like loyal palpitations and love from the other side.
Mm.
And every small seed slurps the juices of creatures smashed down into souls and all mixed up and siphoned out pure. But this is Pup Pup Bruce and the Holy Loam, still fetching to bark it hard in the pop of good fruit. Who knew full eulogies were inside of blueberries?
Oh, wow. That is an amazing poem.
Thank you.
No, it totally is.
It is a poem about just the experience of biting into a piece of fruit and realizing it was like that dead dog nourished that fruit,
Right.
and it was
Yeah.
like, and I'm not only, I can celebrate the life of that dog
Yeah.
in the fruit that I'm eating. And
Right.
it was like, talk about like the world just like blowing up. It was like, that was one of those moments where it was like, oh my God, like this is, so mundane, but this is what I'm here
Well,
for, why
it's the
I'm alive.
right. It's the pattern of reality, actually.
Mhm.
Right. And I remember having that similar experience when I was hiking on Vancouver Island, and there was this massive Sitka spruce that had fallen on the ground, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, laying on the ground, it was probably 4 or 5 feet wide, this log, like it's just massive, right? Old growth, covered in moss. And then there was like a whole city growing on it,
Mhm.
other trees, different kinds of trees, shrubs and lichen and moss, and they were all living on this dead tree. And they were all reaching up, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there it is. There it is. That's a whole story right there. That's the whole thing, you
Yeah.
know?
Like what else can I look at that could even come close to explaining, like,
Right.
this is better than the language that I'm using to describe yeah, I don't even
And
know,
it's
like
also
I'm
the good
observing
news.
a pattern. Yeah, it's the good news.
It's the good news, It's the good news. And this, this is why, thanks to Nate and getting me involved in all this and doing these, reading these books, and now I can say that's Sophia, right? That's what that is.
Mhm.
And there's that verse in Job, the awe of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's where you are, Luke.
Yeah.
That's right where you are. That's good.
Yeah.
And we sometimes think, and I know I did, that, oh, these little things, who am I going to tell them to? They'll never get it. Nobody will get it, right? I'm just like blown away. Suddenly I can see the cosmos, and because what? I saw a tree growing on a dead log.
Yeah. No,
But yeah,
that's yeah,
it's
it's,
just that beautiful.
yeah, no, it is beauty disclosing itself
Hmm.
in the appearances.
In the appearances.
And
Mhm.
you talked about images a lot, and that conversation, oh my goodness, we can't even begin to go down that road, but that's what
Yeah.
we've been talking about too. So
Yeah. Well, we'll do this again, and then we can talk about more stuff.
that'd be fun.
Yeah,
I've
it was
really,
really wonderful.
really enjoyed chatting with you, and
Yeah, me too.
meeting you for the
Yeah,
first
same
time.
here. It's
Yeah.
really wonderful. Really
Yeah.
great.